So hello everyone, welcome to VizConnect, connecting you with the art of data visualization and storytelling. My name is Sagar Kapoor. I'm part of customer success team at Tableau. So VizConnect is all about how we can go ahead and connect each one of you with the power of data visualization and storytelling. It's a weekly community call and we host it on every Friday. We have a YouTube channel. Go ahead, subscribe it to it. Some great content waiting for you. Go ahead and join the LinkedIn group, connect with each other and learn from each other, and follow the hashtag VizConnect to go ahead and get updated with all the latest updates with respect to VizConnect. With that, we have gone ahead and launched our Tableau Community Hub. Go ahead, check it out. Some great resources for you from community blog, community profiles, user group map, new pages, and everything has for you over there at one stop. So go ahead and check it out. I will just post the link in the chat. With that, let me go ahead and introduce our speakers today. We have Erik and Noel with us. So Erik is a data visualization designer at JP Morgan Chase, and he has inspired us all with his Viz of the Day. And today he will talk about one of his Viz of the Day. So without further ado, Erik, over to you.
All right, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, Erik, you're all good.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Sagar, for the introduction. Like you said, I will be going over my last visit of the day today and a little bit about how I decide if I'm done yet and are you really ever done with a viz? So go ahead and before I get started, I'll just go a little bit deeper into who I am. So as Sagar said, I work at JP Morgan Chase. I live in Columbus, Ohio, and my background is in business intelligence consulting. Before working at Chase, I worked at Nationwide Insurance, and before that, I worked at a medium-sized IT consulting company for a few years, and I had the good fortune of working with Josh Smith. Many of you may be familiar with him. He's a Tableau Zen master, and now I have good fortune of working with a lot of great talent at Chase. When I'm having fun, I love to be outside. I love cycling, walking my dog, mowing the lawn, just anything that gets me outside, and really like making cocktails too. And when I need to relax after work, you can. I'm often watching movies and reading. So that's a bit about me before I get started. So when I approach a data visualization, usually there has to be some sort of inspiration, like something that I want to try to implement before I get started, or sometimes it just comes organically and I figure it out along the way. But with this particular visit today, I had come across a few months earlier this blog post by Luke on his blog tessellation.io, and I thought it was awesome. It was around the time when Tableau animations were still very new, and people were coming out with awesome ways to use animations in their vizzes. And this particular one I thought was really cool because it zoomed in on a timeline, and when you moved around the timeline, the part that's shaded in gray, it would update the bars on top, and they would slide in and out depending on the window that you've highlighted. So I knew I wanted to use something like that in my viz that would implement that that sliding type of or scrolling type of bar chart. So I needed to find out what kind of data I wanted to look at. And I think I was just reading. I mean, I'd started ideation for this like months ago, and I've been working on the project on and off, trying to figure out how I wanted to design it. But I remember coming across this article in it was on howmuch.net, and it was sourced from Forbes. It was basically a map of the United States showing the richest person in each state. And I thought that was just a cool data set. I like the visualization that they did here, but I wanted to see what I could do in Tableau with it. So I downloaded their data and I got to playing around with it. So there's basically, well, let me go ahead and show my Viz before I get into the different parts of it. Let's see if I can pull that up. So this is my Viz. It's called the United States of Green, and you can see from the inspiration that I took that it's a similar idea. I have the United States, and each state is kind of the color of the green, the darker the green, the higher the rank of the billionaire or the more money they had. And you can look across the states, and I give you just like some basic details in each state, but when you click on a state, that state will sort of expand with animation, and then the timeline on the right will also update and scroll through. So I want to go a little bit into how I achieved this effect in the visualization. So there's three main parts. The first part is the map. That's what's driving the interactivity. It's the first part that you see when you look at the Viz. And I knew I wanted, when the user clicked on that Viz, I wanted it to be able to trigger that scrolling of the bar on the right. So for that scrolling bars, I decided I wanted to use animation in as much of the Viz as possible, just because I wanted to learn how the animations worked, and I thought it was just cool visually to look at, so that's why I implemented that. And then the rest of it comes down to the details. So the background that I used and the gradient on the title, the different color palettes, different fonts, and spacing and aligning everything on the canvas. That's where the real, I guess, a lot of thought comes in. You know, that's the part of the Viz that you don't want to overlook. So I'll go into each part and talk a little bit about how it was created. So for the map, nothing too fancy. This is the simple type of grid map that most people are probably familiar with. So the data set that I downloaded of that Forbes data, that's my first data set. And then you join it with another data set that has all 50 states, and it has a row and column coordinate for each of the states. And then when you join those together, you're able to get this grid type of view with all of the details that come from your data set. So for the scrolling bars, that's where Luke's blog came in, and I really encourage everyone to go out there and find his blog, and if you haven't played around with animations yet, to take a look, because he has a really good, you know, step-by-step instructions out there. So I used his blog as a starting point, and I needed to adapt it to the data that I had and the method that I wanted to use. So his was using dates, and I knew I wanted to use ranks, and I wanted to control it with the map instead of controlling it by clicking on the dates. So I had to figure that part out, and that was a kind of long, tedious process. I'm not super great at math, so a lot of what I do has to use this guess and check. So, if you're like me, that's okay. You can still create a cool viz, but it really helps if you know what you're doing. So, let me go back to the viz, and I can dig into that for you. So there's two main parts. So there's the scrolling bar and there's the full bar that highlights. So to create this, basically I'm using the estimated net worth of each of the billionaires in each state. That's on my y-axis here. And you'll notice that instead of using the name of the billionaire or the state on the x-axis, I'm actually using this index. And that's because I wanted the ability to scroll through each of the states. So I needed this axis to be continuous instead of discrete. And to set up this highlighting, I'm using this top and bottom calculation that is basically saying for whichever state that I choose, I want the top to be 6 higher and the bottom to be 6 lower. So I just chose that window of that many states to see at once, but that's really arbitrary there. And instead of using just normal bar charts, I'm using lines that when you make them thick enough, they look like bar charts. But I wanted to go with the rounded edges of the line bar chart because that more closely aligned with the circles that I was using in the map. And so to get that, you just need to start out with a baseline. So I'm using average 0, and on the measure values, using the measure name to connect those measures, which gives you the line. So back to the scrolling bar, it starts with the same viz basically, but it takes additional steps to go into it. So let's see. Let me go back. Yeah, to achieve this, so on the full bar, you can see I'm using index on the rows, but on the scrolling bar, I'm using this index adjusted. So I can quickly go into what that adjustment is. So it's my index minus the baseline, and the baseline is this parameter that I've created here, which is just an integer parameter, and it gets updated through an action that is connected to each of these values here. So what's going on is with this, if I show the axis, you'll notice that the state that's highlighted right now is Mississippi, and its value is 0. So every time you choose a state on the map, that state will recalculate to 0, and everything else will be within 6 or minus 6 spaces from that. So that's what this index adjusted and the parameter action do. They help me to update that calculation. So my selected state is always going to stay in the middle of the viz. I'll go back to show just really quickly how those parameter actions are set up. So it just takes two parameter actions. I have one to update the state, so it's controlling from the map, and there's a parameter on the size of the state, so that's what makes the animation of the state grow larger when you click on it. And the second one is updating the bar. And so that is also controlled by the map, and it's updating that baseline parameter. So it's sending over the rank of each state, and it's subtracting that from the index of the state. And that's what will realign the scrolling bar, or what controls that animation there. So moving on to the last part is just going into the details of the viz and the little things that make it more complete and feel a little more polished. So the three things I did that I'm going to point out was using a gradient on the title to make it pop out a little bit. I use these transparent gradients on the scrolling bar to have it fade in and fade out, which I'll point that out when I go back. And my background is actually not interactive, but it has like subtle changes when you click on things in the viz. And I wanted it to be kind of like almost like subliminal, like maybe you notice that something in the background changed a little bit, but it wasn't so distracting that it takes away from the viz itself. So if you just look at the background of the viz while I click on something, you can see what I mean. So these little circles that are in the background here, they're all of random size, and they'll change their size, and they'll actually change their color a little bit as you click on different states. So that's one of the things I added. And I was mentioning the gradient on the title here. I wanted to play around with different ways that I can make the title stick out, so something that would catch a reader and draw them into it. So I use this gradient that fades from light to dark around the title here. And the other part that I mentioned was you can see there's a subtle effect on the scrolling bar where the farther you get away from the middle, is everything looks like it's fading out a little bit. And I actually achieved that with just using some gradients that I had created in PowerPoint, I think, and just laid them over top. So it actually becomes more transparent as it goes along in a gradient here. So the last part that I wanted to talk about was, am I done? So the answer is, for me, it's always no. I never feel like I'm done with a viz, but I don't let that stop me from publishing it and getting it out there, because I know that with me, I can get so caught up in the details or making everything work perfectly that it would just, every viz would take me a year to put out. And that's not the way I want to work. I just want to get out a good viz, but I also want to learn and move on to the next project. So one of the things about this viz is I actually had to revisit it for this presentation, because I hadn't really looked at it too much since I had published it back in December, and I didn't remember how it worked. And so I went back into the viz, and actually here you're not seeing the original viz that I published on my Tableau Public. I had to heavily edit this one to make it so I could understand it, and I actually simplified it a lot. So If you ever download my original one and start to try to break down the calculations and the things that I put into scrolling bar, um, you're probably going to wonder what the heck I was doing. So over this past week, I was looking through the calculations and I took out a bunch of extra crazy stuff that I had in there because, like I said earlier, I don't always understand what I'm doing, but I understand enough to um, to produce something. So it's simplified a lot. All the calculations now are a lot easier um, and make a lot more sense. So how do you know when you're done? For me, I like to get another set of eyes on my viz before I decide it's done. So usually that's my wife who uh, has been a big help to me with my vizzes because she's not in the data visualization world. So I like to have somebody who's not looking at something from that perspective and somebody who's maybe not familiar with Tableau looking at my vizzes and just playing around with it because that is the type of person who you'd want to observe and see how they're using it, what they're getting tripped up on, what parts they're using, and maybe they're not using a part that you thought they would. Those types of observations when you're building a viz can really be enlightening. And when I do that, I let people just play with it. I don't want to give them any hints on how to use it because that's kind of cheating, and you won't get the type of honest feedback that you're looking for. And with eliciting feedback from somebody, you really just want to listen. So that's key. Is you don't want to defend your work and say, oh well, maybe they give you a criticism on something in your viz, and you don't want to come back to them and say, oh well, I designed it this way because, or no, I think this is good because. It's really good to just listen and internalize it and just take those notes back and decide, what you want to do with it then. But if you're going to be defensive of your viz, then there's really no point in showing it to somebody, and they're not going to want to give you the feedback in the first place. So that goes along with the check your ego. So no matter what skill level you're at, if you're just starting with Tableau or you're a Zen master, if you're getting feedback from somebody, you want to leave that behind and just take the feedback as it comes. So those are some of the steps that I think everybody should go through in order to find out when they're done with their viz. So that's the presentation that I have for today. Thanks everyone for listening, and thanks Sagar for giving me the opportunity to present my viz of the day.
Thank you, Eric, for that. I think you have all inspired us with your Viz of the day. And thank you for sharing all your tips and tricks and the best practice and the importance of feedback. Thank you, Eric.
Absolutely.